Hello, sir.
How are you doing?
Thank God. How are you doing? How are the errands?
The errands went well.
Errands went well. Okay, that's good.
Yeah, it's Memorial Day weekend. So here, so
Right. That's very different than Israel Memorial Day.
yep. Yeah, it's kind of different. But yeah, so we just went grocery shopping and other stuff.
Okay, and week 2 of new job successful.
We'll see. It starts tomorrow, the week 2, though, officially.
Week 2 of starts officially tomorrow. Okay, all right.
But for now, yeah, the week went well. Learned about a bunch of stuff. When did we meet? Was it Thursday, Wednesday?
When did you and I meet?
Yeah, like the last.
Oh, when do I meant like in our life? I'm like, we haven't met yet.
Yeah,
Like, and then I thought you were telling me like, did we meet on a Thursday? I'm like, you have a great memory. You could tell me like,
specifically.
No, no, and that couldn't be. It couldn't have been last Thursday. Just Thursday. Maybe Tuesday,
Yeah, Tuesday or yeah, somewhere in the
Wednesday.
middle. Okay, yeah.
Wednesday.
Wednesday.
Yeah, okay. It felt longer. And your Schlag Vomer was
It was good. I actually went to a small kumsitz.
enjoyable. What was like some singing and some Jewish ideas.
There was some singing for sure. There was some marshmallows and potatoes.
Just like Rav Shimon Bar Yochai used to have.
Yes. Did he used to have potatoes also, like with the aluminum foil and everything?
The whole thing. That's why he came out of the cave the first time.
Right.
Like, this is not my potato, someone else's potato. Then he went back inside. I was at a bar mitzvah, and the kid was talking, and he started talking about that story of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai leaving the cave. And I was like, where is this kid going to take this story? He's going to talk about them like burning people, and then like he ended. He came out of the cave, but he wasn't happy, so he went back into the cave. I'm like, okay, it's the PG version. Like, no problem. He wasn't happy. He went back inside.
Yeah.
I had a client. I met him today. His first question was, we're standing on his job site with like all. He's like, well, what are your thoughts about this this Lag BaOmer thing? Like, I could see by your question. I told the client that you are wondering if I partake in the fire festivities, and I'm assuming by your tone you're nervous that that's like very pagan-like. I'm like, I just think we should be careful before we start calling things out. Just I'm like, one should probably be, take these things seriously, but tread carefully. He's like, yeah. He's like, I think that's good. He's like, pagan work. I'm like, well, I didn't end it by saying it's pagan work. I just said like people should be careful. Anyways, so where did you throw your clothing into the fire? I see the clan of Babylon is here to entertain us. So no, I did not throw my clothing into the fire. It gets very intense. It gets very, very intense, these fires.
I mean, from what I understand, it's way less. I had a secular experience of it, at least in Israel, but it sounds like it gets less intense.
This year?
The last few years, since I left, since I was a kid, in my days, I also had like the Kiryat Sans nearby. So, and Kiryat Sans, they had
mountains of fire.
It was insane. Yeah. Kiryat Sans was like, all the Chilonim were like, those the Dosim are going crazy.
It's beyond reckless. It's just, I remember them being just so. I'll tell you, I remember what once
we're overdoing it. So
I really couldn't understand it, and we'll end on the story that when I lived in Harnof, I was sick one Lag BaOmer and I couldn't go out, and I was upset. My dad said, "Hey, listen, come out of bed, get into the car, we'll drive, and we'll just go look at the bonfires." So we went to this one street that's like, it's adjacent to the forest, and on it there's probably like 6 bonfires like going along this whole strip. There are 2 there are two fire trucks, like just waiting there because of like just fear of what's gonna happen.
Yeah.
And I remember being in our car. We didn't leave the car because I was sick, and I remember feeling like uncomfortably hot in the car, like. And I remember thinking and seeing the kids so close. I'm like, how are they not dead? Like, what's happening over here? So
Yeah.
it is very strange.
I mean, that's my memory. Yeah, we used to have fires. There would be like a hill right next to my school, actually, and it was just like dirt. And yeah, probably every 10 feet there would be another like big fire, and you would just walk from one to one, and people would. But it was fun. I don't know, whatever.
Fire. I mean, fire
And my lungs seemed to be fine.
Right.
So after like 15 years of really being in the every year being in that.
There was something nice. My son came back from Sneef, and from his like Boy Scouts, so to speak, and having that smell of smoke. I remember that. I remember having a memory of walking back from a bonfire with my twin sister. Her and I almost never hung out, and the fact that like her and I were walking like 6 a.m. in the morning back home, stinking of smoke, was like, I remember also being a moment like, oh, I'm like, that's cool that I could talk to my sister.
Yeah.
Anyways, okay, so we were in Mishnah. Which number is this? 5, 4, 6?
This is, let me check here. Should be 6.
Okay, we stopped.
I think we start Mikra Mishnah, right? Mikra.
Okay, we were talking about all these the 48 traits, and we mentioned how this is in a certain sense a recap of like everything we've been talking about again in sort of bullet points, so to speak. And we spoke about how the difference of the crown of kingship and the crown of priesthood, how those are genetic, it's goes down with what's the word I'm looking for?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Your
lineage.
Heretical, yes, the lineage. There's a heretical trait to it, and that's why with Torah you could it's open for all, right? And here are the ways that you take on this crown of Torah, and we start talking about all these attributes. And obviously, every Jew is invited to and asked to and demanded to partake in the study of Torah. And part of the study of Torah also means while being humble, while being happy. And we're sort of giving a breakdown of all these things over here. And we spoke about in English, we spoke about Pilpuch Talmidim, which was it's further back in the English, right? If I recall correctly, right?
Debating
with one's students, right? So we talked about like we want to make sure that your students are sharp, and we're teaching each other, and we're learning from each other. And I could be fixed in a certain way of thinking, but once I'm learning with a peer, and I'm sort of open to hearing his thought, sort of, and it allows itself to make its way in and allow me to re-examine and rethink my opinion as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because literally it could mean getting spicy with your students.
Getting spicy with your students.
Pilpul tamide.
Pilpul, right? Okay, that's betibul. And I mentioned that. I think I mentioned then, and I can mention now as well, just because it's relevant. The story of Rabbi Cook, who famously told his student, the Rav HaNazir, the Nazarite student, to sort of to put together all his classes, sort of write them out. And when he came back and presented it to Rabbi Cook said, "You are sort of teaching me. You're reintroducing me to myself. You're reteaching me to myself." And that's an example of how a student or a peer could hear you and then repeat back to you what he heard, and in some way that it could still match what you said and still be illuminating to you.
Yeah.
Right. So that is in debating with one's students, right? We spoke about tranquility in yeshuv, right? So you want to be in a tranquil state of mind, in a settled state of mind. You don't want to have your mind cluttered, right? You want to have order. We spoke about this also with your language as well, that you want to make sure that your thoughts are ordered and they come out your language in a proper way. So too, your thoughts need to be ordered, which would allow for, tranquility, and making sure that you are dedicating time for inner calm, right? That you actually want to. This would be where meditation would actually be a process of attaining Torah values and Torah study, which is first you have to, so to speak, do your Zen sitting. Now, in Judaism, you could argue that you have plenty of tasks throughout the day that could allow you to get into a meditative state, whether it's like the prayer you're doing. A lot of this also has to do with us walking 3 steps back and 3 steps forward before we do the silent prayer, right? Putting ourselves in that mindset, so to speak. So we mentioned that, and then we ended on, and we'll continue with Ben Mikra, right? The study of the scriptures. Right, so that is the scriptures. We obviously have the Torah, but we also have all the 24 books of the OT, as some people call it, in this little corner. And this is obviously the word of Hashem, the word of God, that comes directly from him and then comes to us through Moses and the rest of the prophets as well, and is the foundation of all. As I always ask Haredi or ultra Orthodox students, I ask them what they're learning, and they say, I'm learning, I just picked up a young couple and his wife. A young couple, yes, him and his wife. And my wife were coming back from this bar mitzvah, and I said, we'll drop them off where they need to.
Yeah.
Where they need to go. And they're an ultra Orthodox couple. So I asked them, what are you learning? And he told me, I'm learning the tractate of Bava Kama. So we started talking about that a little. I could see he was sort of caught off guard that like this sort of modern looking couple is now talking to him about this stuff. And then I started asking him, I'm like, okay, but what else are you studying? He's like, oh, well, I also study this Masechet. I'm like, okay, that's great. And I'm like, but what else are you studying? He's like, oh, I study also a little Navi, a little prophets, and some of the weekly portion, right? So this is sort of case in point of when Jacob says, Nach is for girls, right? Because in these circles, that's not the focus. And I said, the Talmud that you're learning, it's the foundation is the prophets. You understand? Like their one-liners then get extrapolated into all these things, right? But I'm like, but that is the foundation. And that just brings us back to over here, the scriptures. That's the foundation at the end of the day, right? Really understanding what is God saying, understanding the magnitude of these prophecies, understanding how they still echo true today and are still resonating today, and why we still read them today, and while they are still being enacted in us today. So Bible study, full thumbs up. Next after Mikra.
So
yeah, go ahead. Sorry, please.
There's the magic book here. It says that it gives you a little interesting anecdote. Is that the Maharal's? It mentions that the Maharal's version of this Braita counts here the quality of Derech Eretz, because as the Mishnah says, without Derech Eretz, there is no Torah. So
can you repeat that? What is the Maharal saying?
Maharal's version of the Braita of this Mishnah or this Braita.
Yeah.
Here it also counts the quality of Derech Eretz.
In it, when we talk about scripture, he's included Derech Eretz in the scripture.
It says it counts here the quality of Derech Eretz, good character traits. I don't know what counts means, but if he also
and then the explanation is because
bli Derech Eretz en Torah.
Okay, understood. So he would be saying, as we always say, Derech Eretz Kazmal Torah, right? So the way of the land, or natural law, the natural ethics is different sort of certain ways of interpretation of this, but that concept that those undergird the foundation of the world, and that's sort of before the Torah, right? The Torah.
I think the way that it's more clear in the book, because it dovetails. They have a comment of why study of scripture and study of Mishnah are also at the same place, because without Mishnah, you can't study the Torah, right? You have to have both of them together. And then it brings the Maharal
Right,
also
so without
saying
derech
without
eretz.
derech eretz you can't have Torah either.
Right. So that my point was going to say that it's what it's bringing in over here. It's sort of letting you the prerequisite before you even study the Torah, right? Is you first have to be in the proper place, right?
Yeah.
Which is aside from being tranquil and all these things, right? By the way, but you could really loom this line in so many places over here, which is like you should have derech eretz when you're hearing someone, when you're speaking someone, when you're like I'm saying, in all these places you should be having derech eretz. So I don't know about that one. But you don't have to exit out on your book. It's okay.
I mean, it's not accident. No.
Okay.
Even though it says it's okay, we have more interesting stuff. But yeah, that's
so go ahead. What else?
No. We'll get there. I don't know what it means, so we'll get there.
Okay, yeah, I don't know what it means. Okay, so the Mishnah, right? So you have the Mishnah, and this is obviously the basis and of the oral Torah, and it also has has its own unique layer that aside from learning it and what we learn from it, right, which is the oral Torah and extrapolating from the written Torah, there's also a level which is this is in a certain sense our first engagement with the text orally, where we can be having this discussion with it, right? Like learning the text was given to us. The Mishnah, which is still the oral Torah, that you could already see in that part of that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
While one could argue that it's quote unquote diluted, because at this point, as we spoke about earlier, there's sort of like there's the zugot, right? I need to be learning it from two people because we no longer have the entire truth anymore. However, sort of in that retraction again, right, of like us losing something from the tradition, there's room for us now to sort of express ourselves as well. And that allows someone to have a joyous experience of learning the Torah as well. So when you get to the part of the Mishnah, you start sort of seeing yourself. It's very hard for us to see ourselves in the Bible. Who am I going to talk to, the prophets, or am I going to talk to King David? But when you start learning about the Mishnah, you start learning about these sages that are also looking at the text and trying to understand it. So that gives us that's own level of joy when doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Shalom.
Yes.
I just want to say shalom. Today's Memorial Day, so school's out in America. I don't know. Is it any special holiday in Israel?
America Memorial Day is a special day in Israel?
No, I'm saying, is there any holiday currently in Israel which is special? Because I heard recently Yom HaTzmaut and Yom HaZikaron were happening.
Right. So we had Yom HaZikaron, which is Memorial Day. No barbecues, no celebrations. A very, very sad time in Israel. And Yom HaTzmaut is a joyous time. This year was still joyous, just on a lower flame, I think, sort of in the country, just because of the war that's going on. We just had our celebration of Lag BaOmer, the
Hilula of Shimon Bar Yochai, I believe.
The Hilula of Shimon Bar Yochai, correct. So we experienced that. And now we're in the midst of a Pirkei Avot class.
If it's not too much to ask, could we try not to talk too much politics or Israel-Palestine or Israeli-Arab conflicts? Just, current event stuff.
It's nothing that comes up unless it's relevant to come up. But generally speaking, it's not my go-to conversation.
Well, that's good. I've been looking at the politics, and it's just hard to think about personally for me.
I got you, Kirk. I could advise not looking at. I could advise not looking at the news, going out there, reading a book, living life, being on a street.
Let's be honest, I'm kind of interested in more philosophy and religion than like day-to-day events than I think some other people.
You're in the right place then.
You're in the right place. However, I would say that what you see manifesting in the conflict is ultimately religious the religious conflicts are undergirding those, and until those things are not fully fleshed out and understood, both on the Jewish side and on the Arab side, we have a long road to go. And this war is just one element of that manifesting.
So anyway, could you read the Hebrew and I could read the English, or does Ben want to read the English?
Where we are right now, where we're in the middle of this one, but when we get to the next section, you could read that in English if you'd like, or in Hebrew. And I just see Aaron joined us as well. So Aaron, good to see you too. Yes, TLC is alive and popping right now. Okay, so we spoke about scripture and we spoke about Mishnah as well. And the next after that is, I'm just tracking it on Skinner, in Bemiut Schora, right? So we have her in minimizing engagement in business. Okay, so that is, well, this is already a transition if you notice. Right now we were talking about these traits that we have, right? And now there's sort of about how one should actually live, right? So if I need to be humble, I need to be careful. That has to do with sort of these internal traits. Now there's actually these external ways of how I'm behaving, or my external pleasures, or my material pleasures. How do those relate to me gaining these merits of the crown of Torah? So bemiut chora, right? It's minimizing engagement in business. And Ben, we obviously discussed this earlier on in a previous few chapters, right? About pat b'melech tochel, about not needing much, living on very little. So obviously
eat salt with bread.
Correct, exactly. So in business, generally speaking, I'm rotating from one place to another. I'm engaging in attempts to, as they say, secure the bag. This is not a bad thing. Right now, Ben, for example, you moved to a new job, right? So there's transitioning, there's moving, there's doing. So all these are, in theory, are taking away your focus from and your inner peace from learning. Ultimately,
Right, and
now
beyond that, like schora itself, materials. Also, we have another correlative Mishnah. Marbe nechasi, marbe deaga. The more you have, the more worry you have. Right? You have a house, you have a car, you have whatever you have. You have a yard. Now you need to worry about maintaining this, maintaining that, getting maybe like upgrading this or whatever. And
the private jet is a good example, right? Because it's the private jet is less about can you afford to buy it, is more of a can you afford the upkeep, right? Which is just all these things that you take on at some point. They're like all these things require, right? So Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt, when they bought their vineyard, right? They're like, we've got there so we could finally rest. But 8 years divorce in with paperwork and lawyers and who's going to get which one and who's. So I'm not saying that's business, but just all these things ultimately end up taking away from us. And the concept is all this time could be spent on learning. Now, of course, we know, and we should caveat that you have to put these all into perspective in the right context, right? Which is, this is not saying don't get a job. This is not saying don't be a great surgeon. And if I'm going to be a great surgeon, of course, I need to be studying a tremendous amount. If I'm studying a tremendous amount, then I need to be, and when I become a great doctor, I'm going to have a good business. All those things are okay, right? The concept is more about the world we live in today, the rat race, the concept about I need to go get there and I need to become like the next, the biggest star, the biggest YouTuber. I need to be Mr. Beast. Those are not, that's not the path we're running after.
So
right, it seems like with the film, like what's the main thing, what's the purpose, and what's the secondary thing.
So you could say like a critique of sort of like the Ayn Rand style selfishness or self-interest is.
Oh, for sure. I mean, like we just spoke about the Shemitah year, right? The releasing the land, the Jubilee year, all these things. Israel in general is a mix between, I mean, it's a mix between capitalism and socialism in a certain sense.
I'm more of a capitalist myself, to be honest. But could I ask a bit of a philosophical question?
You can.
Are you familiar with the Israeli YouTuber? His username is Zarathustra's Serpent.
No, I mean I know Zarathustra from like you mean from like
Nietzsche. Yeah, so he's
Nietzsche, but like
secular,
the YouTuber. No.
So he's a secular Israeli YouTuber, and he comes from like a secular Nietzschean perspective, and he says that religion is arguably immoral because it says that you're created with a specific purpose in life instead of you creating your own purpose, right? The idea of Nietzsche's Uberman is that he rejects existing social orders in order to create a new morality based on will to power. And like he would say, morality is inherently you creating your own meaning instead of meaning being given to you through your creator. And he would say meaning being given to you is immoral because that takes away your choice. It takes away your agency. How do you respond to that critique?
It's not as we say, regular achat. That's not like a 1 minute answer, but ultimately, I mean, it gets into the question of like free will, and it gets into the question of like, you know, the opportunity we have to. There is an ultimate purpose. I'll answer it to you through scripture. When Jacob is dreaming and he has the ladder, the angels are coming up and down, and the rabbis, the sages, tell us that the angels came and said they wanted to hurt Jacob. And they said, we know, we're looking at the Jacob, the image of God, Jacob, that is in the heavens, and that doesn't resemble at all the Jacob that's on the ground. And we want to get rid of this guy. This guy's a joke. And they're stopped, obviously, from doing so. What we're supposed to learn from this is that there is a full potential version of us, right? And we are constantly on a journey to getting there. Now, we can decide, we can elect, as the Bible tells us, v'bacharta b'chaim, right? You should choose a certain path, right? You don't have to, ultimately. No one's making you do this. So
yeah, but the argument is that it's immoral, the idea that you as a Jew were created to study Torah or to bring about the Messiah. Why don't you create your own meaning is sort of the question.
Yeah, but like if I'm buying into that my creator is God and he is he is everything and he is good, right? So that is the answer. You're saying but I mean your question is right, but let's say that's not true. Okay.
Well, I think
it rests on the
it's
assumption
moral
that,
because it deprives you of your free choice. But I think we covered, and there's a Mishnah that we covered here in Pirkei Avot that you can look at, Kirk. I think
hence I said it goes into free will at the end of the day.
So I mean, there's definitely a balance, a paradox in Judaism that handles this in Judaism that is like within constraints. You have the choice that you can lean into, that you can choose. So
you would say the answer is that it's not necessarily that you're created with a specific purpose being immoral. It's that because God is all powerful and God knows the most ideal form you can be, following God's path is moral because it's not like God is arbitrary.
But that correct, and we are told, "Kadoshim tiyu ki kadosh ani," be holy, for I am holy. Right? What does holy mean? I'm saying this as abstract as like what is more. The concept is there is something that we are trying to emulate and can return back to. That is the good. That is the ultimate. We believe as believers that is happening through and ultimately in the ethics we're even reading right now and learning right now. Right now, fortunately for us, right, I would say as part of our argument, right now we're reading thousands of years old texts, which are not only as relevant today, but more relevant today because of the world we live in, right? So I would say that so far the morality of my tradition, right, is reigns supreme as far as its longevity. It's fine that so far it seems like these texts and these ideas are all orienting towards the good. What I think good is in Jewish thought and Jewish understanding through my text, and it happens to be what the rest of the world as well thinks is good, almost to a T, right? We could quibble about differences over here and different lines inside the Bible, but what I'm reading to you right now about, being careful, all these things are being repackaged to you today in an app. But we will continue, if you don't mind, Kirk.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, b'miut chora, we said b'miut derech eretz, minimizing in socialization. So you could think it would say b'miut derech eretz, meaning because we spoke about earlier, Ben, about derech eretz, right? So it doesn't mean about suddenly you should be rude and not be moral, right? Here it's talking about like less worldly interactions, right? Invest the hours of the day in what actually makes sense, right? Quote unquote, in additional learning in the sense. And we spoke about lo tarbe sichai ma'isha. Here too, it'd be like don't accommodate the small talk, right? Which is, and that's always a thin line in TLC, right? You could say in TLC, there's very, very serious conversations happening, and it's not small talk; it's like real talk, right? And then you could have quickly turn into, well, didn't we just talk about this, and didn't we just say this, and are we just saying the same thing again and again and again? And at that point, you'd have to ask, okay, am I using my time well right now? Because this is time that I could, at the very least, be, helping society do X, Y, Z. But of course, I should be learning Torah and doing those moves there as well. So again, b'mi'ut derech eretz, from my understanding, and you're welcome to check your magic book, is not focusing on morality, more talking about like the social aspect.
Yeah, that's basically it brings that from Midrash David about what you just said. And yeah.
Okay, great. Now, Kirk, if you want to, you could read the next one, which is, that was me.
Minimizing pleasure.
Yeah. Go ahead. Utanu, correct. Yes, and you can read it in Hebrew and in English if you want to, or just in English.
Yeah, I'm not as great with Hebrew pronunciation. I could probably read it, but it would not be as good as you would.
Ta'anug. Okay.
And that translates to minimizing pleasure.
Correct. And you can see over here, mi'ut, and you see a few over here, minimizing. Me'at is a little, mi'ut is to lema'et, to minimize. So minimizing pleasure, right? So again, in
this seems like an appropriate Mishnah to study on like Yom Kippur.
It's always appropriate to study Mishnah, but specifically on this, but I mean, here it's talking about on your day-to-day, right? As far as like your pleasure, it's removing away from material pleasure. It's not saying you can't laugh or you can't smile, right? But you want to reduce things that are going to reduce things that will require you like this false need of happiness. Or we have this with like scrolling today on your phone and it's releasing endorphins, right? It's suddenly like you're needing that more. And our requirement and our need for all of these external pleasures, right, is not only is it not healthy for us, but also with the fact that it's, again, a distraction from Torah. And again, we should use the concept also Torah, in a liberal sense over here, which is not only learning over the Torah, but also experiencing Torah life, right? But if I'm constantly running after the material things, I'm never going to get there. And that's what we say, Ezehu Ashir, Hasamech Bechilko. Who is the one that is happy? One who's happy with his lot.
Right,
So it's not about minimizing pleasure, but minimizing, you could say, a very superficial understanding of pleasure.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, and I think with all the minimizing, it's good to keep in mind what you also said, Chezi, that it's not like you're minimizing something and you're staying empty. It's you minimizing for the sake of filling yourself up with the main purpose, right? The Torah, which is the liberal understanding of what that means, like the mitzvot and what you do. So that is like, in order to give that the space in your life, then some things need to be readjusted.
Well, and in a not so miraculous, by design, and I would say by divine design, we see that there's only so much we could take in, right? As far as like our processing power. And like, if I just like at some point, if I'm just watching crap TV all the time, right? There's only, I that's eating up some of my memory, so to speak, with what I have, right? However, when it comes to Torah, it's limitless in a certain sense. And that's because they stack over each other constantly. So they self-reference each other. And this is something that Jordan Peterson is like, he loves right now, that he's using it for the large language model, because he sees how the Bible is like self-referential and keeps on mentioning itself. And that's why that's the foundation of all books and the foundation of all language. And that's like when we say things today, or we look at things, and even when I use the word look, it's really coming from the Latin or French word this, and that really comes from the Bible. So really it's all happening through this prism, this frame of religion. And even an atheist is a religious atheist, because he can't help and look at the world through that frame, so to speak. Right?
You think like Ayn Rand or like a hardcore atheist looks at the world from a religious perspective?
Are you asking me right now?
Yeah, like I just curious what you mean. I'm asking for clarification.
Jordan Peterson would say they can't escape it, because the words they use are already biblical, are from the Bible, right? His idea is that, his theory is that, because the Bible is so foundational, and from it springs language, translations, concepts that even if they're used again to rebuke the Bible, it's too late. They're already baked into your sort of system of the way you look at the world, into your psychology.
I see. So it's like on a subconscious level, you might say you consciously reject the Bible, but the framework you're operating in, the culture and the understanding, it's going to be rooted in that biblical framework.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. There was this debate between this pastor and this professor, and he was like, "Oh, you have faith." He's like, "No, I have confidence." And he's like, "No, you have faith." And he's like, "No, I don't have faith. I have confidence." And then the guy gets up. He's like, "Confidence in Latin, confidant," and he's like, "With faith." And the guy's like, "Oh," but like that was the concept. Was like, the word you're using is the thing I'm telling you have, and you're saying no, it's not, and you don't understand that you're trapped, so to speak, for the atheist, because like you're trapped because God is one and God is all. So that's why like it's inescapable. But you're taking us deep into secrets of the Torah, Kirk. Here we're keeping it for the kids. No, it's not for the kids. But okay. B'mi'ut shena, right? We said after we're getting rid of the pleasures, b'mi'ut shena, we are minimizing sleep as well, right? So this is both in terms of time and style, right? So I don't want to be sleeping for hours and hours and hours and hours. I could take on the Rambam regiment of 8 hours, as they say, and obviously you could decide what that is for each individual. The idea is your body, the machine, this thing that you wake up and make blessings about, and you have to be very careful. You have to cut your nails. All these things you have to deal about your aesthetic. That body matters, right? So if we call it like my body's my palace or things like that, there's a sense where that's very true, which is like this body is hosting that brain and that soul, and that brain and that soul, they need Torah. And if they didn't get their sleep, then they're not going to learn Torah well. So like you need to make sure that this body is rested, right? So we spoke about this, how, no doom scrolling, none of those things that are just like, time sucks basically. And the Torah says also, we spoke about in the past, Ben, what happens if you wake up in the middle of the night and you can't sleep? Fantastic. Great time to think, Torah, contemplate. Exactly. You could do it on that time when you quote unquote, it's magic time because really you should be sleeping. Now, with regards to style, this has to do with sort of a sleepy routine, a dormant routine, right? Which you're just like, lazy guy, I want to be sleeping. Now, while I'm saying this, I should also mention that, because I mentioned this in the last weekly portion, that the Shemitah or the Sabbath is the day of rest or the year of rest. And the reason it's the rest, this is talking about the true rest we're eventually going to have in
Olam Haba,
which is, there's no exertion. And Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, Harashar Hirsch, says that lazy people, in a certain sense, they are intuitive of what's to come in the world to come, and that's why, like, the reason they're lazy is because their soul is yearning to go back to that space or to where we could actually behave as if we were actually quote unquote lazy. So
right,
really,
it's too early.
Right. So I said, that's the excuse, Kirk. When you wake up in the morning, your mom says, get out of bed. You'd be like, Mom, I'm thinking about Olam Haba. I can't. I'm trying to rest.
The reason I mentioned Yom Kippur is because that's referred to in the Bible as the day of affliction, I believe. That's the phraseology?
Day of affliction. It could be one of the, there's yes.
So after minimizing sleep, you want to read the Hebrew and...
Sure, go. So we did minimize sleep. Read the next.
Wait, just minimizing sleep doesn't mean you need to afflict yourself. We're not talking about affliction here, because it's talking about balance, right? Again, so minimizing sleep, minimizing.
We don't hit it. We don't.
Yeah, this is not
hit
about
ourselves. We don't deny ourselves from here and there. There's some people that do some silence fasts or some general fasts, but as we know, the Nazirite ultimately has to bring a sin offering because God does not want us to remove ourselves from participating in life. The Torah allows us to participate in every aspect of life. There's a famous Gemara about that as well. But this woman that wanted to, whatever. the famous Gemara about that as well, but we get to participate. Everything, it all has to happen in the proper orientation. Okay, bemiut sicha. Go ahead. Kirk.
Minimizing talk.
Minimizing talk, exactly. Right. So, so this is purposeless talking. Right. So we spoke about having small talk, but it's not only small talk. It's you should be looking for a meaningful conversation. So I would say, in the plethora, which is the internet, right, Kirk? The fact that a 16-year-old boy is reading philosophy is on and on a ethics of your father's stream right now, I would say that is not purposeless talk. Being and talking and seeing if Sneeko agrees with like the red pill community,
or destiny, or the drama, or just
that's gobbledygook.
Frivolous. It's frivolous.
That's nothing, right? But you understand it's frivolous. There are full industries built on that. Swag, money, things built on people watching, and then people watching reactions of reactions.
There's a time and a place. So there's sometimes for serious talk, there's sometimes for the simple pleasures in life. And Noahides, B'nai Noach, don't have as much necessary time they're going to have to spend studying Torah as Jews, because they don't have as much halacha to observe. But still, there's, I think, a balance that everyone has where sometimes you might indulge in simple pleasures, but you have to be grounded in seriousness and not waste time.
Correct. Now, this is an example that Ben and I have discussed multiple times here, which is about what is the appropriate, quote unquote, talk to sever Torah talk, right? So I'm learning Torah, but I see a tree and I want to stop and bless the tree. So we said that's a problem because Torah is the value. What if the blessing of the tree is part of my whole Torah view? Then potentially it would be okay. So here too, what if my conversation is like a TLC-like conversation, which is like I'm talking about metaphysics and the understanding of God and commitment? Okay, so great. So that isn't necessarily a detraction from Torah. Some would argue, be like, that is the conversation of Torah or understanding God. So that wouldn't be a purposeless talk. We, of course, have to challenge ourselves and ask ourselves.
I just want to say sorry for the background noise.
I'm sorry?
It's my family. Sorry for the background noise.
It's okay. It just never happened again. I'm joking about that, Kirk. Okay. Bemiut schok.
Minimizing gaiety. Is that how you pronounce the gaiety?
Gaiety, maybe?
Gaiety. Like being like
Gaiety.
The old concept. I'm gay as in I'm very happy. So gaiety. Chabad. I think this is the Chabad translation, right? Very controversial then. Bringing this kind of stuff into our stream. Okay, so we want to minimize laughter, right? Obviously, laughter, or let's say that gaiety, that mindset can cause one to take important matters lightly, right? I'm not taking things seriously because I'm in this like very lighthearted mood, or it's more about also having that state of mind that's very sort of. Everything's a joke. Every line is another dig, and like my whole life is sort of looking at things in laughter. And in a certain sense, it's problematic. And this goes back to the tension between Ishmael and Isaac, which is Isaac is his name, Yitzchak, which is he will laugh in the future, because right now we are still in a broken world, and therefore we cannot actually spend time just laughing. Really, there's a sense. A prophetic sense in the name, which is one day there will be a laughter that will be appropriate. When Ishmael gets kicked out of the house, he's standing next to the tent, and it says, "Ve'inanar metzachek." He was laughing now, and the sense was not about that he was like laughing at the situation, but more about he thinks we're living in a world where you have time to laugh at things. But Ishmael, wake up! The world's broken, right? So it's not. We're not at a time where we could just be focused on just laughing, right? On just having that being the mindset. However, I would say, and Ben, you and I discussed in the past also, how laughter in the right place, right, could also be a bridge to let us reach the next level, right? Laughter allows us to blur the lines between chaos and order. It allows us to take an idea and bring it to a next place where once we bring it to the humorous realm, it allows us to look at it differently, and then potentially we could go to the next level of the Torah understanding. But again, that has to happen in the proper orientation. So there's a difference between a joke at the bar and a joke in a 5-hour study session.
Yeah. So
Comments, thoughts, Ben?
Let me see if there's anything in the magic book. And I think we mentioned in the past about like also, and the Kabbalist Hasidic. I remember reading that in one of the essays from the Chabad rabbis about how the humor is the thing. It releases. It allows people to it enables them to have better dot, right? So there's a lot of also that those metaphors also play around with that.
Dot is wisdom, I believe.
Dot is
Dot is Bina is more like wisdom.
Okay, Bean is more like wisdom. Which one is Dot supposed to represent?
I would say like knowledge,
embodied understanding
So knowledge and understanding
together.
But even those,
Right here it says that, and it's in the Tanya, but okay.
We moving on?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, 1 second. Okay, where were we? We are in Erech Apayim. Do you want to read that?
Yeah, slowness to anger.
Exactly, slowness to anger. I should be so blessed to have that trait.
And this is in the 13 midot, I believe, like the 13 attributes that
Rachum v'chanun erech apayim v'rav chesed v'emet notzer chesed lalafim. Yes, correct.
These are the 13 attributes of mercy.
I'm sorry?
These are called the 13 attributes of mercy.
But that's not what we're going through right now. Here specifically, we're talking about right now just the concept of erech apayim. And obviously this is in, like we said, having a tremendous amount of patience and understanding. Us having the patience is understanding that everything is from God and having the humility to understanding that everything's from God, not getting upset, right? And obviously it's very, very hard to do that. At what level do you want to have that conversation, right? Like the car accident, it was from God. I came home and I stubbed my toe and my kids being like, so, very hard. Yes.
I was going to say, I heard of a story about the Chofetz Chaim where somebody stole one of the Chofetz Chaim's shoes, and because he had one shoe which was useless, he gave the other shoe to the thief because he was like, I don't have any use for one shoe, only two shoes matter. And if you're so poor that you need to steal my shoe, I forgive you. Like, just take the other one. But that is a very, you could say that's going above and beyond Erech Apayim.
I mean, it's more than it's sort of turning the other cheek in a certain sense. The real story is, though, that it was a fake pair of Air Jordans, so he didn't care. Okay, no one knows that, though. But, he was the first one. No, but that is a good story. And you see those stories in the Tzaddik, right, which really could embody that kind of understanding. And but that's not the way the Chassid acts. Is not necessarily for every single person to act that way. However, we do.
So maybe not go as far as that, but try and be patient. So maybe not forgive a thief, but if somebody did something that you find is offensive or rude, to not immediately go to the worst interpretation or the worst characterization of them or get very angry at them.
Right. Imagine if you're debating with somebody and somebody brings about like a very offensive perspective. Now, if you are angry, it's going to be very hard for you to make sense and be articulate in your retort. But if you calm yourself down, you might be able to actually describe your position better and bring about a better discussion. So, once you're angry, it's going to be very hard for you to keep yourself intact and keep your wisdom. And right, we're talking about the Kinyanei Torah, the ways to acquire Torah. So it's going to be hard for you to acquire Torah if you get angered easily.
Yeah.
And as we learned from Nahum Ish Gamzu, this too is for the good, right? Is having that kind of mindset, which is, the famous story that he couldn't go into the hotel. He had to sleep in the field. And when he slept in the field, his candle blew out, and then his chicken was eaten by a lion. And then the next day they found out that bandits came and destroyed the city, and if the chicken would have made noise, they would have found him. And if he had the candle, they would have seen him. So really, it was all for the good right now. But it is understanding that we are one part of a larger symphony and game that is being played. We should understand our position, and that's why we need to be oriented properly, right? So to see ourselves within this large tapestry, but we also have to understand that ultimately, as we have faith, all these things are for the good. Belev shewotze tov.
Good-heartedness.
Good-heartedness, exactly.
I just want to make one final question about the last one. Do you think that has any, the last one about slowness, Tanger, do you think that has any, you could tie it back in any way to like the other day when Jacob was a little bit upset that you invited that Thai Israeli guy on and was sort of upset
I thought
with
you said no politics, Kirk.
I know it, but it's relevant. But you would.
I'm joking. Do I think that Jacob could be slow to anger? First off, I don't want to rebuke my dear friend on his channel, number one. Number two, because he's my dear friend, I will rebuke him. No, I'm saying because he's my dear friend, I will say that we all should work on being all these attributes. We should be so fortunate to do a fraction of them.
Amen.
Exactly. So like we all, Kirk, this is true to everyone. I'll tell you more. I have to question sometimes if these streams themselves are taking away from my patience for my kids, right? Because if I know I need to be studying and I need to be doing this, am I taking away from my life force, so to speak, from my my version of Chezi? And why am I stacking on more things, right? The more things I take on, am I making more difficult for myself? So all of us always have to be working on trying to create a balance like this. And being slow to anger doesn't mean like suddenly something bad happens to you and you have to quickly catch yourself and be like, be slow to anger. That also means don't put yourself in situations where you know things are going to get a little crazy, right? So it would be silly for me to say I'm going to be slow to anger and then elect myself to drop myself in the middle of, let's say, a pro-Palestine conversation, right? I might get into like a heated debate because I put myself in that kind of position.
I understand. That makes sense.
And by the way, ultimately, Jacob ended up having the guy back on the stream, right? So you just got to see he wasn't slow to anger, and then after a few minutes, he realized that, and then let him back on, right? So, and like David does, when you repent, all is forgiven if you do so sincerely. Belev shirotze tov, in good-heartedness, right? So obviously, good-heartedness, you want to have a good-hearted nature. When the Torah meets you in that sense, right? And we spoke about this in a different version, which you want to make sure that the channels, so to speak, for Torah to go through you happen smoothly. So this is sort of a lubricant, which would be good-heartedness, right? Mm-hmm. Being in the right place, having the right attitude, obviously is needed, and this is true towards all aspects of life. Basically, you want to be good-heartedness. Bemunat chachamim.
Faith in the sages.
Faith in those sages, right? So faith in our wise sages, right? Who we believe through tradition, God
and through Masorah,
exactly,
inherited
through
the Torah.
God reveals His world through the Torah, right? And that is the connection we have, and they are linked to Him, and they are, we have this beautiful tradition in some synagogues where on Shavuos, which is coming up, Pentateuchs.
It's 49 days after Passover, I believe.
Correct. And as we receive the Torah, so the rabbi gives out different letters to all the different congregates, little piece of paper in the synagogue, and then everyone starts and they say, I am Moses, son of this, and son of Amram, and I received the Torah at Sinai. And I gave it to Joshua, and then someone else to Joshua, and everyone reads the next person he gave it to. And it goes all the way till it gets to the rabbi of the synagogue, who says, I learned under this rabbi.
When is this done?
On Shavuot, right, to show the Masorah, right? All you need to take your rabbi, you need to connect him to the rabbi. You have to just go back till you get to the Vilna Gaon, and we know the Vilna Gaon went to this guy, and we know he's a descendant of that guy. You get to David HaMelech, bam, you carry the one. Next thing you know, you're there. So the point being, it's to exemplify how this chain is
unbroken.
is exactly is unbroken.
Um,
Yes.
what I was going to ask is, do Orthodox Jewish people believe there's usefulness in studying general philosophy, like, well, like I said, Nietzsche, Rand, Kierkegaard, like, because these
The
obviously don't have any
answer
sort.
the answer to that is as such. The answer is yes. The question is how and when. Um, when I say how, it's also in what is the context you're studying it. The way the Rambam would phrase it, who clearly studied Aristotle,
Aristotle.
talks about Aristotle, and many other Islamic influences as well. And that's why he says, now when he writes, when he's 28 years old, he's not as brazen enough to go out and say who he got it from. He talks about how in the Mishnah Torah, how I gathered all this information, I distilled this information, and he says, Kabel et haemet mipi omra. Mipi she'amra. Mipi omra. Accept the truth from he who says it. Right? So he is looking for truth. Even if I'm finding it in Aristotle right now, I'm going to take what's truth from there and adopt it because that's what I'm looking after. So he says, Da ma la'ashiv la'apikoros. We should know how to respond to the heretic. You could interpret that to the heretic inside and to the external heretic as well. So when the questions come up and you become perplexed, you have the guide for the perplexed, or in Hebrew, it's Moreh Nevuchim. It's the ones that are embarrassed, who are embarrassed by this tension of sort of the other philosophies of the world that came out at the time. And I would say also when has to do with the proper timing of this. Already in our Jewish texts, Rihal, the Kuzari, Rav Soloveitchik, a lot of these people have already been distilling, and the Gemara itself, and Pirkei Avot itself.
I saw the other day, Federici Jacob was having a conversation with somebody. He was a Kierkegaard scholar, and he was talking about how the Rav Soloveitchik in Halakhic Man referenced Kierkegaard in his philosophy. So, you have this Christian scholar and this Orthodox rabbi, So there is
Correct. So
usefulness.
that is a beautiful, beautiful moment. And he was talking to Aaron, and they were talking about footnote number 4, and specifically the Kierkegaard connection is fear and trembling, where Kierkegaard talks about the knight of faith, which is Abraham, and what the things that Rav Soloveitchik learns from him, and also the things where they differ as well. But in the conversation between Rav Soloveitchik and Kierkegaard, or between Jordan Peterson and the sages of Israel, that is where the divine word of God gets illuminated and found. I hope that answered your question.
That makes sense.
Kirk. Okay, Bekabbalat HaYesurin.
Acceptance of suffering.
Acceptance of suffering. So that's a doozy, obviously. So again, in a very low resolution, and in very general terms, the suffering obviously frees us from the sort of the shackles that bind us to negative things, right? It allows us to absorb the light of Torah. It gives us mental preparedness for accept things when they happen as necessary, right? Because things happen in the world that are not always going to be easy, but learning how to accept these things build character as well. Now, there's a whole level of why do bad things happen? Why does evil happen? There's a difference between evil that's happening from my friend and evil that's happening from an earthquake, and those are very, very deep conversations. But generally speaking, assuming right now the people on this in this stream and listening to us understand that as God-fearers, we are accepting suffering in our life, I would leave it at the level of that suffering can also be used to strengthen us, strengthen our resolve as well when we live in a world that unfortunately has suffering inside it as well. And ultimately, as C.S. Lewis talks about it, using a Christian example over here, which is when the craftsman is sculpting the marble, right? Every blow is devastating, but ultimately it's being done to create a beautiful masterpiece. But while those blows are happening, they're very painful, so to speak.
So could I ask a theological question about theodicy and human nature?
Yeah.
So do you know who the philosopher Hannah Arendt was?
No.
So she was a Jewish woman, secular, who survived the Holocaust, and she wrote a book called Eichmann in Jerusalem: A Report on the Banality of Evil. And her basic thesis is that evil is not necessarily a conscious act that people do, but rather it's sort of following the rules. So Goebbels may have said, "I'm not doing this because I'm this consciously evil person." He might not thought that. He just sort of went along with what Hitler and Himmler and people up the chain told them. And I'm curious if Judaism agrees or disagrees with sort of this view on human nature, that like when somebody does an evil act, it's not necessarily a conscious decision to be evil, but following the rules of society. Does that make
No, and
sense?
I'll give you, and this won't be a full answer, but it'll be the answer that will need to suffice right now. But one second, I want to be the perspective of Ben's time. How are you doing, Ben?
I'm good.
Okay, so
I can do for 2:45.
okay, we are told, right? Respect your father and mother, right? And there's many things your father could tell you to do that you must do. But what if your father tells you to desecrate the Sabbath? Can you do it as well? Right? These are two clashing commandments, so to speak. However, you and your father are both commanded to fear and love God, and therefore, no, it doesn't matter that what your father said. So this is true about society as well. Society can tell you many things. There's ultimately your relationship between you and the Maker, right? And between you and the Maker and the rules He gives you and the Torah you have, that sets very clearly what you need to be doing. And we see this again happening with the Levites. That said, when Moses says after the golden calf, Mila Hashem Elai, who is he who is with God, come to me. And the Levites come, and the Torah mentions in a very dramatic and scary and intense verse how they don't recognize their mother or father or brother, right? And that's because they clearly understood the hierarchy, right? And we also see this with the high priest. No, high priest, you can, even if a regular priest could go, a regular priest can't touch anyone dead, even if he's lying on the floor, right? That's sort of the reverse over here. But the concept is ultimately God is the one that is making these decisions. So society is not going to be the one that dictates to us how we are going to behave. While society, in some cases, if it's coming from a proper, healthy, oriented place, society and the community can affect, in some cases, halakha, but not to that extent.
Yeah, well, I don't think Arendt was saying what Hitler or Himmler did was good. It's just that they were a product of their culture. Obviously, they were evil. It's just like, did they
What do you
know
mean?
they were evil?
But Kirk, that's the whole Bible. That is the reason, as far as biblical criticism goes, why we are appropriating those culture and we're using concepts like the cherub, God's stretched arm, like that. The reason we take the tabernacle and it's the same size as Ramesses II's war encampment, and that's because we are appropriating from other cultures, and we are not going to be affected by them. Right? We are not going to let ourselves worship the Asherah or go to Baal. Instead, we're going to take those concepts and reappropriate them and reorient them and make them holy. So we are not going to be affected by the culture in that way. Anything that the culture does with blood, we will turn to blood practices only in the temple. Anything that they're doing with sacrifices, we will reorient. So the Torah is very much rebelling, in a certain sense, against the common culture of the time. Now, I could say that in the culture of the time, in all paganism, at some level, there's a hint over there of holiness, which is obviously people trying to connect to the powers out there. Behind them is God. I just want to say hi to our dear friend, David. Hello,
Hello,
David.
David. Shalom.
All right.
Shalom. Chezi, I have a question related to some of that, though, is that
Jimmy.
I was recently thinking about David and how he realized that Saul broke an oath. And so David puts to death 7 of the sons of Shaul because of that, because he broke, because they determined that would be righteous because of what Saul did, but Torah forbids such an action. So did David now, he might be operating not as someone following Torah, but as someone who's just being diplomatic and doing the diplomatic correct thing. So whether or not this could be, that's an example of David doing something which is what is requested of him. It appears in the text like it's righteous, even though it could be interpreted as breaking Torah. Just wondering your opinion on that.
Right. So that is a very, very, very hard portion in the Bible, right? Which is like, it's very hard to understand how that happened over here. And there are some answers which I think are sort of like, they're not good answers. Basically, the timing's off. It wasn't really talking about him, but ultimately, it is very, very hard to understand how this all happened. I need to think of a better. I know there are better answers over there. I really can't think on the top of my head what is the answer to that, but I know that is definitely like that's definitely a tense element, especially because we know David does repent for other things that he does. And I would just also mention that there are things called hora'at sha'ah that we have, like for example, building the altar against the prophets of Baal, right? You can't build an altar that's not in the temple. However, there's that needed to happen, so a prophet is allowed to basically call like
it's an executive order.
Executive order, basically, and there's a question of how long that executive order could last, right? Could it last for a few generations?
And the prophet does not light the fire. Also, in such an instance,
that fire comes down from the heaven, right? That's right. Obviously that's the affirmation that was okay. But the concept is that at some point, so there's a term we use, et la'asot la'Hashem haferu toratecha. So we take it from a verse, but the attitude is in order to fulfill God's word, I must deny God's word in a certain sense. When there's this sort of tension, I do not think that's the case that we have right now with David that you were mentioning earlier. I'm just saying something like that does exist, where for the greater good, so to speak, that needs to happen, and that is also a tension with regards to halacha, and I would say the involvement and development of halacha in the 21st century. I think you need to have rabbis that sort of have that sort of backbone, so to speak, where decisions need to be made, moves need to be made, changes need to be made. But of course, one has to do so very, very, very lightly.
Well, that's part of what makes it such a difficult passage, is it just the expedient decision that David makes? Because it does produce peace. It is a very wise, shrewd decision as a policymaker. Is it good as a studier of Torah? Like and that whole situation too is all it's layered with people. The people are said to have this where Saul shouldn't have done it because they made themselves a deal with Israel, but they made it under false pretenses themselves. So there's all these issues of deceit and what is proper versus what is a good strategy. That's
right. So I would say that King Solomon stretches a line, right? Being like with the women and things like that. And his attitude is like, listen, ultimately, like even if my Egyptian queen is bringing in idols right now, I'm the wisest of all men. I understand that you didn't need multiplicity. I'm already there, right? So like it's a house for prayer for everyone, but clearly not everyone was there yet. And like he went too far. Now you could argue that the whole case with David and his tension is, at any point this could have stopped, right? Like it basically, the false king at this point, Saul, if he just relinquishes, we're not going to have to deal with this, but he doesn't relinquish. He keeps on chasing David, and this creates, the more intense the resistance is, sort of the response in a certain sense from a narrative level, from the story level, needs to be much greater as well when we're being told this story. And so you could argue God is killing the firstborn son of all the Egyptians. Is that the way to respond back to to the Egyptians? And the sense was like, there's a lesson being taught over here right now. Is it the way, like, what about that Egyptian baby? Isn't he an innocent baby? And in the grand scheme of things, like, the answer is like, yes, but there's a lesson that's being taught right now, right? So for the master of the universe, the calculations are different. And seemingly, if David is trying to channel that and trying to channel like sort of an answer to how am I supposed to respond to the descendants of the king that denied what God told him to do and didn't relinquish, there must be a very a harsh response, so to speak. But again, I owe you like a better answer on that.
Yeah.
It reminds me a little bit of, I don't know if it's related, but there's a story in the Chumash of like the guy that stabs that impales the man.
Pinchas impales Zimri and Cosby.
Right, so that's extrajudicial killing that has been being done.
God accepts his zeal. Absolutely.
Right, which is also a very hard thing to think about. But so I don't know if that's connected.
That is that it is connected because, first of all, that is a story that again is still playing out. Mm-hmm. That the fact that it's Pinchas, who's from the tribe of Levite, who's showing this zeal right now,
right?
And the person he's skewering or he's piercing over here is the president or the chieftain of the Simeon tribe. And this goes all the way back to we had that tension between and Levite with Dinah, and they both reacted out of the zeal. And here you could see who in their traits had zeal, which was just for zeal's sake, and who had zeal that could be properly oriented, right? And we have this again with the Levites, like I just said, that come to Moses and they say, well, we don't differentiate between our mother and father. We're only here for God ultimately. And that continues all the way till Ezra, right? In that story, there's a tension in the encampment. They ask Moses what to do. Moses doesn't answer. And Pinchas comes and just makes the act. And we have this same move with Ezra where, again, there's this issue. Ezra comes and he hears about all these men that are married to these intermarried, right? They're married to all these non-Jews. And there's this great cry. What are we going to do? And Ezra doesn't say anything. And suddenly comes this character. I'm forgetting his name right now. And he decides, he's like, this is what's going to happen. And they're going to divorce their wives. And it's sort of agreed upon, like, because this is what happens. And there's a sense where the leader, Moses, or even Ezra, we can't say that. It needs to come from the people, and it will. And if it comes naturally, then it could be understood, and it could be even blessed, so to speak. But that sort of violence needs to sort of occur from a pure place. It can't occur from Moses saying, "And now skewer him." It needs to happen from someone feeling this is an affront to God, so to speak.
Yeah. This maybe I didn't phrase the question properly. I suppose the question. I'm trying to rephrase it because we're kind of.
Didn't David ask a question?
Like, do you believe Hitler, in his deepest consciousness, thought what he was doing is evil? Like, according to Jewish theology, did Hitler know what he was doing was wrong, or was he so beyond even coming grasping?
That's assuming we assume that he's like a rational character, right? That his brain wasn't just like mush from all the crazy drug cocktails he was taking. But let's just say, can an evil person believe he's doing the right thing? Yes. And do I believe that ultimately, even that person, God has his own understanding of course, yes. So that's not a problem.
Okay.
Okay. Hamakir et mekomo.
Knowing one's place.
Knowing one's place, right? So it's recognizing your place, not to diminish or to exaggerate, right? Don't be the guy that says like, I'm nothing, I don't know anything. Like don't deny yourself, don't retract yourself completely. On the other hand, don't exaggerate your value, right? Don't assume you know more than you do. Recognize the room, read the room, be aware of that as well, and be precise and focused, right? So if I know my place, I know that, and let's say, again, I'm going to use it because we're in the space of the TLC. One could say, know your place. And if you found yourself on the 15-minute rant, maybe you should check yourself for a second, because like it's been 15 minutes and you're talking about quantum physics, but really you just graduated college yesterday, and maybe you shouldn't be like, maybe you should slow your roll, so to speak. And this is just a general question. We could be thrown into conversations where we live in a world today where we have to feel and we have to everything. I know this and I know this topic and I read that article. So now I heard Joe Rogan talk about it. So I'm now going to confidently talk about the aliens as well. So know your place, slow your roll, and it will do you good.
Yeah.
Well, Jacob says, like, I'm trying to elevate a conversation, and the voices I want to platform should be at a certain level. And I think Jacob, like, just to get back earlier to the guy, he thought that that person didn't know his place. Like, he came from a specific political viewpoint that he believes is so below where any rational, elevated conversation will begin at. There's not really a place, right? He's not knowing his place in the conversation, and why should we platform him?
Yes. So the argument is, even though someone could sound, right, I'm saying you could have the philosophy of the absurdists, right, which you could be like, this is, I mean, that in theory could be like, no, what is happening over here, right? Postmodernism ultimately would be like, this is gobbledygook. And that's why even having the conversation about it is pointless. And the line, the logical line that this guy was following, it seemed to have many problems with it. However, I would argue that if there's enough good faith indications, one should be understanding and try to still create space. But again, that's for we could get into that later on, Kirk. Okay. V'hasamech bechelko.
One thing that's from the book that it mentions, that it kind of separates. There's a few commentators that kind of separate the features, the attributes that we talked about now, and what we talked about until now, and what we're kind of talking about from now. So right, okay. So they talk about how the first 24 qualities or actions or attitude that somebody needs to embody, and then the rest, what we're going to talk about, kind of come in. They're more easily attained. They're almost like a result of what you've done. Or we have another person, Moshe Al-Mushnino, that mentions that 24 attributes that we spoke about are the ones that you use to acquire Torah, and the other 24 are the ones that are used to retain Torah. So it's also kind of like an interesting way, if anybody wants to look at these attributes later on as well, to look at
retention. Them. Retention is extremely, extremely important. Mm-hmm. My friend used to work on this retention company for like AOL retention to keep your internet on. And he would tell me the horror stories he would do retaining clients. Like this woman complaining a hurricane destroyed my house. Like I need to disconnect from this internet. He's like, but Mrs., if another hurricane comes, how will you know? Right? You have to keep this internet line anyways. It would be crazy. So retention is a triggering word to me. Hasamech bechelko, one who is satisfied with his, what is it in English over here? Satisfaction with one's lot. Exactly. So we spoke about this in the past, being happy with one's lot. And you have to realize what you have in your life and how to utilize those tools that you received from God and how to properly utilize them as well. And that doesn't mean that I can't use educational tools to grow, right? That doesn't mean if I'm in one level, I'll be like, and now I will not learn any more math because like this is where I am. You obviously should aspire for more, but be happy with where you are at that time. And that doesn't mean being complacent. It's just being appreciative and being understanding that even if you find yourself in a sort of a single room bedroom and the rent is being difficult, obviously, even in that place, try to understand how you could be. And this is to go back to what we said earlier about being happy with not many things, not many material things. And that ultimately is like sort of a prerequisite for this kind of understanding. If I already know that I should be happy with very little, right? So even if I have very little, obviously I will be happy with that lot as well. But generally speaking, when we live in the world today where every kid needs a new iPhone.
Yeah, but like, what if someone's nature is they are, as an individual, their human nature is that they want to achieve more and they want to have more.
Then they should curb that behavior.
So you think you're going to curb their human nature?
Are you saying right? I mean, my human nature is to go. This is literally my human nature is to go sleep with everything so I could procreate. right? And then we say like, hey, don't do that. Curb that behavior.
This is also the temptation that the Nachash brings forward, right?
Yep.
That not to be human, but that you could be Elohim, right? And this used to be. I understand what the bringing this up as a problem, because this is the desire of our culture. Like in Macbeth and in so many tragedies, what is brought forward is the idea that people are ambitious. And ambition used to be considered a deadly sin, and now ambition is a sign of strength. It is so difficult to remove ambition from being a human being in our understanding now. But it used to be very common that the most popular stories were ones that understood the evil of ambition.
Right.
Well,
And that's why taming could be might be a better word here. For most things, taming, right? The Tanya talks about it very, very, very strongly. Other sources, I'm sure. It's not necessarily curbing of like taking it down and like suppressing it.
Right,
It's
right.
taming the dragon, the bull, right? To taking it like ambition is not unto itself.
Yeah,
You can use ambition to study more, right? To do more Pirkei Avot streams or whatever it is, right?
when you break the spirit of a horse, you don't make it so that it doesn't work now because
Right,
you
exactly.
broke it. You actually, by breaking it, you make it able to work.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a balance. So I don't think it's necessarily that material pursuits are bad. It's just when you're doing a material pursuit, you have to know what the end goal is. Are you buying this? Are you posting this thing on social media just so you can get an adrenaline rush? Or are you doing it because you actually have a point you want to make and you feel like you're going to get emotionally satisfied from expressing it? So I don't think it's per se that the material pursuit is bad, but it has to be in a proper context and knowing what your end goal of it is, like knowing what's in your interest long term instead of just impulse.
Right, yeah. And the end goal is not necessarily doing it well or doing it in an articulate fashion. That's only the way you do it. The end goal is, yeah, what does it bring about for you, but also for other people, for the environment, for the society.
This is true. Again, it all boils down to the Torah is offering all the experiences of life are possible in the proper orientation through Torah, right? So it's even the ambition you want to have, right? So we talk about the ambition to be the first one to do the mitzvah. Be ambitious on, now even that has a limit. We talk about how the Talmud, how this priest stabs this other priest because he wanted to be the first one to make it to the altar on top. So like, obviously, then again, it gets out of control, right? So it's like David mentioned, it's always there, which is like when you put yourself in front of what the actual thing you're trying to get to, right? You're seeing yourself as the one that needs to be doing it rather than this thing needs to be done.
Right. And it was not ambition for Saul to act as king. It was ambitious for Saul to act as king when he was no longer king, when God had removed that blessing from him. Now it was no longer a satisfaction with his lot. Identical action, but just in a different period of his life.
All right. Siag ledvarav. Okay. Qualifying one's words. Exactly. Right. So this is really qualifying, setting boundaries around your words, which is also something extremely, extremely important, and understanding that we have a very big responsibility, as we said in the past, Ben,
to communicate properly.
I'm sorry?
To communicate clearly.
Yes. We say sages, be very careful with your words, right? Because people are listening to you, right? So understand you have a responsibility for how your words are understood, right? And setting those boundaries when necessary. And because every rule has its exception in a certain way, but I'll just from an example of the Noahide movement. So there's this letter that was sent out within the Noahide communities of some drama, disputes between the different schools of thought within the Noahide world. And one of the rabbis was talking over there and saying, I hear people teaching classes are talking about Noahide ideas and saying, oh, it's logical. Oh, it's spiritual. He's like, what do those words even mean? Right. And you could think about it. What's the big deal? We know what that means. And he's like, no, but when it comes to, here is a novel group of people called the Noahides. They want to partake now in understanding and having a relationship with God. Every word matters, and the precise word matters as well, because if you're going to say like, oh, they should do X, and I'm just going to throw out a term that has grave ramifications. How is this person going to live his life? How is he understanding what you're saying? So
Yeah.
we're very loosey-goosey in TLC to, there's a lot of terms that get thrown out there. Embodied, emergent, and like we're very loosey-goosey with that. And you could say there's a power, there's a strength in that, which we don't feel like constrained by that. However, if I'm teaching a class and I'm using the word infinity in the wrong, like if I'm using the word infinity in Kabbalah and I'm giving it the same example that I'm using in a math class, I'm a very bad teacher, right? That's not going to make sense. So we have to be very, very careful in putting boundaries in the words I use and how I qualify them.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's just each individual will interpret another individual statement in the way that their framework operates under. So, if you are not clear with your language, you might have 2 or 3 people who listen who come to completely different conclusions.
Chezi, could it also be lined up with qualifying one's words where, not to always bring it back to this, but the Nachash doesn't lie to Adam and Eve in the content of literally word for word what he says.
Right. Don't touch. He didn't say don't touch. He said don't eat.
They don't actually die immediately. Their eyes are opened. There is a certain manner in which God says that their eyes are open. Now they discern these. So he doesn't lie, but somehow the way that he qualifies all of his words is a lie, even though all material spoken is true.
I think what you're pointing at, this tension with the Nachash, well, it's Nachash and Adam and Eve really, only gets corrected with Joseph. And you could see the lack of communication is all that tension. Adam and Eve, lack of communication due to the Nachash, but just because they were not clear with each other. If she was clear when she was talking to him, you'd be in a better place. And then you have Cain and Abel, tension. The brothers the tension continues all the way. And Joseph, the brothers tell him, like, they say we hate him, right? And Rashi says that it was a merit because at least they wore their truth on their sleeves, right? They didn't say one thing, like they were very honest about the reality. And only at the end, when they realize, they get scared, now that Jacob died, maybe he was nice to us, but he's going to change his mind. And he tells them, guys, forget that dad's dead. It's all good. We're together. And that's sort of the whole story of Genesis is lack of communication leads to disaster. And that all has to do with the word, right? Understanding what I'm saying clearly. It took all the way from Joseph. And that's his father's rebuke as well. When he tells his father he's having dreams, why doesn't Jacob say, listen, I had dreams. My grandfather had dreams. My great-grandfather had dreams. Like, you're one of the Jedi. It totally makes sense. Because he said, you are being a young Padawan. You don't know how to use the Force yet. The things you're saying right now, you don't feel it. You're not speaking clearly. And the way you are interpreting your dreams, right? You're not doing it as a skilled prophet yet. Later on, and I could get into the details of how this works on with the sequences as well, but with the dating. But later on, when he starts actually prophesying properly, like when he's in jail, right? Then he's a lot more mature. And you could imagine that it probably was a bad move of communication to go out to the brothers and be like with his fancy little coat and be like, you're all going to be bowing down to me, boop, 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 poking him and running around. And as someone more mature, he might have gone about it, right, in a much different way, obviously. And that would have obviously caused a lot less tension. So communication and being careful, that is literally probably, the original sin is lack of communication. Starting from when God says, where are you? Right. And there's already that I'm not going to respond back. We're hiding things like that. So all that stems from lack of communication.
It kind of ties into, we spoke a while back about, and I can't remember the other term. We talked about tzedek, justice.
Yeah.
But that can only be in a state of, I think maybe we used shalom, right?
Yeah.
Like the court can't give any decree. It needs to give a decree that it would actually be followed by the people. So there's something there's this balance to be done. I don't know if that kind of connects to communication, how you communicate things, right? Because Joseph, you could say that in some ways he was right? When he was prophesying, telling his visions to his brothers, he was talking about the mother and the father bowing to him, and that happened at the end, right? So he wasn't lying, but you're saying it wasn't. It was something was wrong there.
Well,
in the
and
way that it was so.
I think related exactly to what you're saying is the idea that Melchizedek is the king of peace, right? Is within that passage, the one that Abraham sacrifices to
Mhm.
is the king of righteousness, is also the king of peace. That those things are right together.
Yeah, he's, as you know, he is a novel figure.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So
No,
there's not many Melchizedeks running around. Okay. Ve'ino machzik tova le'atzmo. You want
Not
to read
taking
that?
credit for himself,
Not
oneself.
crediting for itself. Exactly. Also, something that we deal with
I just
nonstop today, and it's again fascinating that the rabbis at the time were dealing with this as well, thousands of years ago. And right, so it's not attributing to yourself things that you didn't learn or that were not earned. Right, knowing that ultimately God is the one that granted you all this. Right, it's not the strength of your own hand, and without teachers and without, like, you wouldn't achieve any of this as well. So you have to also be aware of your scaffolding, whether your parents, your friends, everyone that's around you as well, the surrounding you're in and what allowed you to even think the way you think. And it's much better to share and spread good news and good teachings with others, and not sort of try to, with an ego move, try to bring all that attention right to yourself. Right. So this is the move that, again, unfortunately, we still see around us all the time. But recognizing to shine the light on others, and like we said earlier, right, know your place. And we said that doesn't mean that you need to diminish yourself, right? It doesn't mean like you have to like disappear, but it does mean that you have to, yes, know your place, or not take credit when no credit's due.
Yeah, just is this David gentleman? I don't believe I've heard him before. Is he a Noahide or a Christian or a Jew?
I believe David is actually, we never discussed this, but like a Messianic Jew, but not really.
No, I don't. I do not classify myself as a Messianic Jew.
Not really. Okay.
So I would say I practice some form of Messianic Christianity, but I don't identify myself as a Messianic Jew. I am a Gentile. I identify myself as a Gentile. I am a Christian, but I want to represent Torah as Torah. That's the way that I feel it, and believe that that's the wisdom that if Christians have, we received.
Okay.
I mean, I would be interested then to hear your thoughts on the Noahide concept and movement, but for a later time, or perhaps later after the stream, want to try to get a dent to this. By the way, Ben, we're still not going to finish this one today, probably.
Yeah. I need to head out like in 5 minutes. So
okay.
Happy if people want to continue and they're enjoying this.
I mean, we'll stop with this one and we'll continue. We could continue talking. Ahuv, likableness, or loved, beloved, right? So people obviously love you, and ultimately this just means like have tact and be a sociable person, right? Be the guy that people recognize, be the guy that people like. Again, it's always this balance. It doesn't mean you are the life of the party. It just means like when someone asks you for the time, don't burp in their face and run away, right? Just be a sociable person that people can interact with. And this goes all the way back to, and if you're that guy, then your house will become the Vad LaChachamim, right? A place where the sages will want to come and convene, and where the parties are going to happen, because all these attributes are part of you. So this leads you to that kind of life. Ohevet HaMakom, love of God. As we say, HaMakom, the place, is also another name for God himself, because he is the place of all.
Yeah, I feel like Ahuv is basically, it's Ahuv, and then they break it down, right? Because Ohevet HaMakom, Ohevet HaBriot, this is a breakdown of what Ahuv means, in a sense, right? So it starts with general.
Well, it's Ahuv. There's a comma though. I'm saying Ahuv is also.
I know, but in some sense, I mean, like the Maharal here also says, Ahuv, likable to God and likable to man, right? So in both senses, at least the Maharal takes it.
I would say again, that move of the Maharal, that's like a prerequisite. Like if we're having the conversation of like also loving God at this point, like the guy's really like, if I'm on like tractate 35 and I'm thinking again about loving God. Yeah. Right. So we loving of God, obviously. So this is simple, pure love to God, our Father, and the giver of the Torah. So this is like very, very, very classic. Ohevet habriot, right? The next one after that is
humanity.
which one?
Love of
Right.
humanity.
Love of humanity. Exactly right. So I'm loving of all. I want to the welfare of all, exactly like the Torah wants, right? The Torah is not only focusing on Judaism, it wants the best for all the world, and the nations of the world will be blessed through you. As far as Abraham, Judaism has a universal message. It has been quiet for 2,000 years, but it definitely has a universal message. And in some sense, Christianity, by hook or by crook, sort of took on that mantle of the universal message, and the Rambam.
Now you're seeing with the modern Noahide movement, Judaism coming in with the Noahide movement, and not necessarily sweeping away Christianity, but sort of taking in the Christian roots of Western culture and transitioning it more to the roots of it, which are Judaism, right?
Yes, in a certain way, and again, there's a tension there. They're like trying to, according to some, allowing Christian Noahides to. Again, there's some rabbis that already see Christians as Noahides already today. They're already Noahides, but again,
well, and Maimonides believed that this was how God was using them. That ultimately they were bringing the God of Israel.
Correct. Both Christianity and Islam, he says that they are path makers. This is in Laws of Kings and Their Wars, chapter 14, the fourth Mishnah. And however, he is adamant about Christians not being Noahides. As far as he's concerned, Christians are idol worshippers. Muslims are not. Ironically, he
Christians
does
are
say,
less anti-Semitic.
what? Well,
Christians
you have to realize the context he was growing up in as well. Like, he was very just surrounded by Arabs. He didn't really chill with Christians. However, he does say you could have dialogue with Christians. You can't have dialogue with Muslims.
Well, yeah.
And the reason is, he says Christians, while they're idolaters, they still believe in the Old Testament. So therefore, like, you could have that discussion with them. They're not trying to detract from that. Muslims are monotheists. However, they deny that our Torah is the real thing, and therefore there's no conversation to be had with them. And unfortunately, that is why Christians and Jews, as indicative in the TLC, have managed to bridge many bridges. However, with Islam, it is extremely difficult to move forward, because as far as they're concerned, I am literally a cheat. So to speak,
let's not get too much into the anti-Semitism of the Arab world, and
okay, just to cut it because I have to run away.
You got it.
But I appreciate it. Thank you, Chezi, for the conversation.
So we'll continue next week.
Appreciated you talking to you as well.
Yeah. All right.
Shavuot
Then we'll catch you later.
Thanks.